Hi, I'm Jerry Bowyer. Welcome to Meeting of Minds podcast. My guest today is former economics professor, former member of the United States Congress, and currently dean of the largest Christian business school in America, perhaps in the world. That is Liberty University's business school. He is Dean David Brat. Dean Brat, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Jerry. Good to be with you and Susan.
And always great to have a conversation with you. So there are a number of things I want to talk about. There are issues that, we work together on. I think maybe, the one to lead off with is the whole world of ESG, woke capitalism, the politicization of corporations. And you also, the school sponsors a CEO summit, which is bringing together leaders who are very much leading in the right direction away from that politicized capital. So I hope we can get to that as well. But
sure,
just kind of give me your take as a business school dean on what's happened to big business in America.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. I don't think there's any 100% understanding. But if you just look at all the threats to the United States, it's not monolithic, right? I mean, you've got the globalists who are on a war with a nation state. And a lot of that is just Marxist driven. And I'm serious about that, right? And so the Marxist thought is destructive, right? It was destructive of the Judeo-Christian religion, against the rule of law, against free market capitalism, any of the foundational elements of the Judeo-Christian West. It's critical. Then you have the competition with China, which I think now finally people are starting to see as a true competition. Well, they are a nation state, and they want to continue to be the dominant or hegemonic leader in the world. They're not quite there yet. But they're also attacking through everything from economic warfare, financial warfare, fentanyl through the border, ideological warfare. All of it was captured back in about 2000 in a book called Unrestricted Warfare. Then you have the American left, which is no longer liberal, and it's just ideological, right? Again, a huge Marxist influence on taking down the business class. And, this is very interesting because if you just look at the big tech firms, I think that our big 5 tech firms in the U.S., the market cap of those 5 firms is greater than all European firms combined when you look at market cap. And the surprising thing and the interesting thing is that they're all woke CEOs, right? So it's very interesting that they're going along with a lot of this. And that, that's in contrast to if you just take the Fortune 500, most are woke, but I don't think most of them are on the leftist, Marxist agenda. I just think if they don't go along, they get punished. And the tide may be turning on that story. But, as the facts emerge now with the Toyota story coming out, the amount of rare earth minerals needed to do some of the EV stuff, the narratives are getting increasingly weak as the data kind of come in on, ESG, the environment. China gets free press. It's always positive. They're the worst polluter in the world. So that's just nonsensical. Social do-gooder stuff, that's up for debate, right? The conservatives don't do a good job of showing how we help people, and the left owns the mainstream media, right? So they've just had a Marxist critique, right? Capitalists are bad, we're going to help you. Well, that's starting to fall apart too. And then ESG and then corporate governance, that is not well understood by too many Americans, what corporate governance is and how it can be manipulated. But there is pressure coming in now. It takes a year or two for the American people to wake up. But some of the corporate boards now and the leaders of companies and their constituents are starting to message. And so across the board, I think the ship is finally starting to turn. It's going to turn slowly. It's not going to look like a win for quite a while, but it's coming.
Well, and I think it's important that there be business education that is not aligned with the march through the institutions, right? The long march, Gramsci's long march through the institutions. Yeah. Because it seems to me that one of the things that's going on with these corporations is that Fortune 500 corporations recruit from the quote unquote best schools.
Right.
Well, the problem is the quote unquote best schools aren't the best schools anymore. They
Yeah.
have the best name brand
Yeah.
because of a glorious past, but
Yeah.
they're essentially ideologically captured. So
Yeah.
if you just hire from the Ivy League and put somebody in charge of DEI or human resources or whatever, you think you're going to get excellence, and what you're really going to get is ideological conformity, which seems
Yeah.
to me this creates an opportunity
Yeah.
for somebody like you
Yeah.
who's training future business leaders. Because these companies and these boards are not generally ideologically captured.
Right. Right.
They tend to be older. They're a previous generation of businesses,
Yeah.
and they don't want ideologically captured staff too. But we need to give them alternatives of an alternative feeder system for executives and for board members as well.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And a school like Liberty, because of just the sheer size of your program. How many people,
Yep.
how many students do you have in your business programs?
Business program, we got 3,000 students undergrad and then 25,000 online. So 28,000 business students, and then the universities at 130,000. And we integrate seriously the Christian faith into every single lecture. It's not into a course, or we try to hit the topic. The faculty are all people of faith. And they weave the faith into their disciplines as best they see it, and they're outstanding faculty.
So you've got 28,000 business students,
right?
And you've got a marketplace that is waking up to the fact
Yes.
that it's no longer safe to hire from the Ivy Leagues, and think that you're going to get executives who are focused on profit.
Yeah.
You might get executives who are focused on social justice.
Yeah.
It seems to me that's a tremendous opportunity for.
Yeah, it is, and just all the old school ideas. Max Weber and the Protestant ethic, etc. I mean, it's for real, right? The Judeo-Christian West has always produced a work ethic because we know we're here for a short period. Right. And we're here to build the kingdom of God on earth. So in addition to getting a paycheck and, paying your bills, et cetera, there's meaning involved. And our students really get that. They're the type that will come early, stay late, have a smile. They like people. They love everybody. Right. They're commanded to, but they intuitively enjoy loving people as well. And so, we're sitting in a just a great position. Our numbers are going up year by year by year, and so that's good news. And universities, name brand universities, I won't name them, in our area, they have mandatory pronoun studies for incoming freshmen, and that's at every school you look at. And I'm not exaggerating, right? The major universities, right? State schools, etc. And so when the kids see that, they're numb too. They're like, "What is going on?"
Yeah, and if you're a big business, you got to wonder, what are you hiring?
Yeah.
When you're hiring somebody who's leading with their pronouns,
Yeah.
you're hiring trouble. You're hiring future lawsuits, ideological conflict, identity politics, divisiveness, as opposed to someone who comes to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I will say one thing, you correctly said the CEOs aren't ideologically, all on the same, or the boards aren't. But I tell you, when you go downstream in a lot of these major firms, the HR departments, et cetera, it gets a little creative quick, right?
It does. The ESG departments, the HR departments, the DEI departments, and the corporate social responsibility departments. This is one of the things I've talked a lot with the proxy services about, the ISSs and the Glass Lewises, which definitely are tilting left. But, they have kind of a legitimate, problem here, which is when they go out to their clients, they say, send, clients would be asset managers, send us your people, and we will form a consensus about what your policies are going to be. But the CEO doesn't come to the meeting.
Right.
The CFO doesn't come to the meeting. The CIO doesn't. Nobody who does math comes to the meeting.
Right. Right.
So the social justice people come, and so that skews the whole process because they self-select. So
right. A little humor to go with that. 60 Minutes did their big artificial intelligence piece, and they let their CEO go on, who's a sharp cookie, But then they had HR on the show. All the folks were from HR. There were no techies. They didn't let the techies near the mic because they didn't want the truth to
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said a moment ago about the impact of a biblical worldview. If memory serves me correctly, that was your doctoral dissertation, wasn't it?
Yeah, I did. Well, I did a MDiv, Master's in Divinity at Princeton Seminary, and then a PhD in economics.
Got it. And which one was about the influence of Christianity on the rise of capitalism and economics? Am I right in remembering that one of them?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. No, I studied history of thought, methodology, history of science in my seminary days, along with all the the religion courses, and then PhD in economics. Yeah, I did cross country economic growth following the Solow model that won the Nobel Prize, and Mankiw at Harvard, who wrote just an unbelievable. People were just laughing because his theory matched the data almost perfectly, which never happens in economics. So that he provided the framework that explains what causes economic growth in a cross-country sample, 120 countries in the world. And so capital, technological growth, and he added human capital. And then I added a Protestant variable, and the T-stat jumped through the roof.
Yep.
And boy, oh boy, the publishing presses weren't in a hurry to show that result, to put it mildly, and my dissertation committee didn't enjoy it either.
I got to tell you, I'm seeing the same thing in the data. One of the speeches that I've been giving over the years is I do 2,000 years of economic history in 20 minutes or less, right?
Oh, wow.
And what I have is I have like little bubbles, and they move as GDP per capita.
Gapminder?
But it's like that, but we've created our own, and it's better.
Oh, wow. Good,
right? So
good.
we created our own system that's more interactive, but it's like
Good.
Gapminder,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we coded for religion.
Yep.
Right.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so there's a blue for Eastern religions, and there's green for Islam.
Yep.
And the red spectrum is Christianity, but Eastern Orthodoxy is like orangish red, and Catholic is pink, and Protestant is bright red.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, what you see is this bright red geyser coming out of Amsterdam in the 1500s, and then it hops over with William of Orange. And basically you see Protestantism leading the world into what they call the Great Takeoff. I mean, it makes a difference. Christianity makes a difference, but which kind? I mean, I don't want to be biased. I'm actually a Catholic deacon, okay? Okay, so, but I'm a Protestant in theology. It matters which Christianity. One of them was pro-market, and the other was a little more metaphysical, a little more Aristotle.
That's right.
And the Protestant was a little more Hebraic and Dominion-oriented.
Yep. Yeah, and Doug North won a Nobel Prize 20 years back for his work on institutions. And so he did his brilliant example that he used was to contrast England's decentralization, which is the key to the religiosity piece. It's not just, your faith and the number of prayers per day. It's the decentralization, breaking up Rome, breaking up your parliament, freedom, rule of law, Magna Carta, all that kind of stuff. And he contrasted that with Spain, who failed to do those things. And so it's just a brilliant short analysis if people want a case study from the, Nobel laureate candidate. But yeah, no, you hit it spot on. And there's a book from Swanson, who noted the importance of having revolutions from beneath. And you see a little of that happening right now with this populist movement, right? Kind of Tea Party building into a populist that now includes black, brown, blue collar workers.
Right.
Coalescing, RFK. It's going to be interesting seeing what's coming up. But that revolution from beneath is happening again, I think.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. We've had Deirdre McCloskey on this podcast before. I'm not going to mess with pronouns. I'm just going to refer to Deirdre McCloskey.
Right. Yep.
And McCloskey has argued that Christianity has definitely made the difference, but it's its institutional impact. So as much as I'm for prayer, the number of prayers you say a day, that personal piety isn't really the driver here. It is institutional and cultural change that's the driver here.
Yep. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And her thesis, I love her work. She takes on the Marxists. She's got 3 huge volumes, and one of them goes through all the different schools of thought which explain the causes of modern economic takeoff at about 1776. Right. And her theory, which she proves pretty well, is that it was the change in moral vocabulary associated with work that caused this. And, if you look at it, St. Augustine and Aquinas and Buddha and Confucius, they did not have moral language that asserted that work was virtuous. But with the Protestant Reformation, et cetera, you do. And so, but it's kind of funny. She will not allow the Protestant ethic in there. She knocks that down in the same book. So it's kind of funny. This use of moral language is key. Well, where do you think that came from, Deidre?
Yeah.
And so, she's got a little split in her thought there.
Yeah, I think she's, when I talked to her about, so I'll just say Deirdre. I think that Deirdre and I debated about this a little bit.
Yeah.
And the argument, I think what Deirdre is trying to avoid is Eurocentrism.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And to which my answer is that's fine. You can avoid. Look, if the Protestant Reformation had taken place in sub-Saharan Africa, sub-Saharan Africa would be the global leader of the economy today.
That's right.
So it's not Eurocentrism. It's just that's where it happened.
Right.
That's where it, and Eric Nelson's book on this is great, The Hebrew Republic, because they rediscover what Nelson argues is that there's a rediscovery of the Hebraic root. So the first wave of the Reformation is, okay, we've got a Greek New Testament. And now we know salvation is by faith through grace.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until the Hebrew they start learning Hebrew and they start studying Torah that then you get a new social order, and that starts in the Netherlands. And that's why right now the reason why babies almost never die in childbirth, as opposed to half of children dying as children, is because of that shift in worldview. That's why we live to 80 rather than 35. I mean, that's the fruit that bore.
Yeah, no, I'm all with you on that. The Hebraic piece too. Calvin was the most Jewish theologian you can find. Pro Old Testament Hebrew scripture, and then James Madison, just as a quirk, went to Princeton Seminary, which
stayed an extra year to learn Hebrew, right?
To learn Hebrew, and he wrote the Constitution, right? So it's amazing stuff.
I'm sorry, I stole your line there, but that's always
it's been ignored. It's just unbelievably important, and it's been ignored.
Yeah, and argued that if you're well educated in America, the classical languages shouldn't be Latin and Greek only, but Hebrew should be one of the classical languages. Absolutely. And you go back to Plymouth Plantation. Yep. Right. A lot of it's written. A lot of the notes are written in Hebrew. They were part of it. It was like a little Israel there.
It is. It's the New Jerusalem, right? It's city on a hill, all that stuff. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Fascinating stuff. We're kind of geeking out here, but I knew you did your dissertation on this, so I thought that we kind of unplugged you.
It's very important. It explains modern reality for the people out there who aren't academics. You might forget the basic proposition that whether you're in sociology or anthropology or literature or history or economics or philosophy, you're explaining the same reality. You're supposed to be, right? It's amazing in the modern university how you can have multiple views of human nature across these fields. One of them's got to be more true than the others, right? And it's called science and testing. You put together testable propositions to see who's got it right. And I think we got it right.
Yeah, there's another Nobelist who wrote the book, The Escape from Hunger and Premature Death.
Yeah, right.
With that photo, I think. And that was the normal course of humanity.
Yes.
Everybody starving and shivering. And frankly, that's where the ESG folks would have us now.
Boy, it's brutal. I know. Kings, well, it's related, right? Because until 1776, on the data thing you're talking about, everybody made $500 to $1,000 a year until 1700. The whole world, no matter what culture you're in. And why is that? Because you lived under a king or a pharaoh or a despot or whatever, right? Completely centralized. And it was awful. And so people miss the key ingredients. Everyone just looks at modern economics at the margin right now. That's how do you think we got that, right? We got that through the history of getting the rule of law and private property rights and a culture of morality. And then Adam Smith on top of all that stuff.
Right. And Smith is really getting it from Pufendorf, and he's getting it from Salamanca School, right? So this is all coming out of theologians.
Right.
And all right, so that's history. Now there's now, right?
Yes.
And you've done some lectures and you do a lot of interviews on this, and you do regular economic updates where you talk about inflation. And you seem to have taken on the mission of reacquainting the world or acquainting non-economists with, now don't run away, people. There's just a little bit of algebra coming. Don't be scared. No. MV equals PQ.
Right.
If you get this, you get it. It's
Right.
worth it. So,
Right.
Dave, can you just kind of help us understand MV equals PQ and why it is probably the most important equation in understanding why my grocery bills are so high?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, MV, M is money, V is velocity, equals, P times Q. P is the price level and Q is the GDP for the country, say. It's the quantity of stuff you make. To make this really easy for people, you can ignore a couple of those and let's just make it M equals P, right? At the margin, that's not that far off, right? You can study the details later, but M equals P. Well, there's an equal sign in the middle. So if you increase the left side, the money supply, and that's the amount of cash and the amount you have in your checking account, roughly speaking. If you increase the money supply by 40% on the left side of an equation, and it says equals, what has to happen on the right-hand side of the equation? If this goes up by 40%, this has to go up by 40%.
Yep.
Right? And so if you print 40% more money, which we, at the height of money creation, that's what we were doing, the price level's got to go up. And then there's some other things that'll stifle that, lower prices from China or some other, complexities that'll fit into that story. But the Fed, the complex thing of this is, and I talked to out at Stanford, John Taylor, who followed Milton Friedman, right? So Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize for this MV equals PQ.
Right.
And John Taylor's the living, proponent and followed Milton Friedman. And he said, this is way back when at some economic conferences, I got to talk to him. And he said the Fed caused the '08 financial crisis. And I was like, well, there's all this other stuff, though. There's total corruption, in the financial markets, and there's derivatives and all this mortgage-backed stuff and all that. And he says, nope, that didn't cause it. And so that ties back into our equation, right? So if you increase the money supply by a lot, it's all that money has to go somewhere, right? And so this is the part that probably isn't as explained as much, but that money went looking for a rate of return in the stock markets and bond markets. And back in 04, 05, when they printed too much money, it went into the real estate market, and that caused a real estate bubble, and that popped, and that created the horrors that followed in the financial breakdown. So then you go, whoa, well, they certainly learned from that, right? And this is back in the Greenspan, Bernanke.
Yeah, era. They've learned. They'll never make that mistake again.
There's no way you're going to do that again. Well, and P, by the way, P in that equation, MV equals PQ, P is the price level. And in economics, if you mess with prices and you ruin equilibrium and you don't listen to markets at all, you will create what's called distortions, not in one or two markets. If you mess with the entire price level of the country, you're going to distort the entire country.
Right.
And so they did this, and they held the interest rate at 0% for a decade. The Federal Reserve did this after causing the financial crisis.
Yes.
Right. So not only did they print too much money, they needed a way to create even more money. So they did quantitative easing, kept interest rates at 0%. That's the interest rate is the price of money. And so if you distort the price of money, all of banking is predicated and sits on top of these prices. And prices are information. That's the important part. And so people are locked in, as you see right now with this, with the middle level banks, they're locked into contracts for 5 years. And now at the end of that cycle, they just raised interest rates from 0 to 5% in a year. Well, what do you think is going to happen to your economy? Right? So they created huge bubbles again. There's this one's called the everything bubble. We got our inflation up to 9, and now it's down to 5 or 6. But we're going to live through. We're not done with this yet, right? The day of reckoning is still coming. The amount of stimulus the Fed put on its balance sheet was $9 trillion. And that $9 trillion also served to validate
coming up from basically $1 trillion.
Yes.
In other words, they weren't like, they didn't go from 10 trillion to 19 trillion. No, they went from 1 trillion to 9 trillion.
9 trillion.
I mean, it was
stunning.
Yes.
And that was to accommodate in 19, the federal budget was 5 trillion. And then we had this disaster COVID, 7 trillion, where we gave paychecks to everyone and shut down the economy. And the 7 trillion seemed to work. Some of its, purpose was to keep people afloat somewhat. and then 7 trillion the next year, and then 6.5 trillion. And now we just locked that spending in for another 4 years, likely, right? At least 2. There's no caps on that debt ceiling increase. And so we just locked in permanently an enhanced $2 trillion. We locked in an emergency COVID economy for the next 2 years when we don't even have COVID. And so that's the new normal. It's the
ratcheting effect.
Yes.
Emergency,
right.
And then when emergency's over, you don't go down. Right.
That's correct. Yeah. And that in a nutshell is where we are right now. So everyone's saying, well, Dave, you've been saying the sky's falling and the markets are overvalued and whatever. Well, it's hard to say where the end of this is because the Fed keeps stimulating, right? So they just added another $4 trillion in federal government spending this week. And so the markets go, hooray. And you know this can't end. I'll give you the end story. In 10 years, and this is Congressional Budget Office, the debt is at $50 trillion. And so just take the current interest rate of 5%. 5% on $50 trillion is $2.5 trillion a year in interest payments.
Right.
Just in interest payment.
Right.
I told the whole budget used to be
it's half your budget. Yeah. Half the current
budget.
Right.
It's going to be interest, and that's on the back of the kids.
Yes.
And so that's the new piece, right? Inflation has caused us to go into that mess, and interest rates are now up, and paying interest on that debt. That's got the Fed scared because now they're in a no-win position. They can't speed things up without causing utter inflation. They can't slow things down without cratering the banking sector. And so we'll see when the stimulus has to end at some point, and the markets will dictate that.
Well, I follow the Fed funds futures market very closely, the WARP report and the CME probability. So one is a prediction of future interest rates as extrapolated from the futures, and the other is the output isn't the prediction of the rate. The output is the probability distribution. Okay. And that market has been screaming that the Fed is done or very nearly done. Okay, but inflation is still north of 4%.
No, I know. Right.
So what that means is the Fed has to give in on the inflation question, right? And because if they don't and they raise rates, it's a definite recession. But even more than that, it's a definite budget crisis. Because they're raising the interest on the money that the government is borrowing. So it seems like it's an inescapable dilemma. If you fight inflation, you have to have a debt crisis. If you avoid the debt crisis by continuing interest rate suppression, then you have to have inflation. It's an unsolvable problem given the policy outcomes that they've been pursuing.
Yeah, I personally, I think they'll probably bump it another 0.25 again and just gently keep going up, because they don't want the interest costs. They have to beat down inflation. There's no way. And even the left is probably telling them, you got to get rid of this inflation because we got government spending to do. You can't be spending all of our money on interest payments. That's going to crush our agenda.
Right. Futures market thinks that they'll be cutting by the end of the year.
Yeah, I know. But it's been saying that forever. I know. Yeah. I'm waiting.
Yeah. Look, I don't know for sure. I guess my approach is, I think markets are smarter than I am, and even though we do macroeconomic forecasting, I trust the market's forecast more than I trust mine. But
same here.
So it seems to me that this is the great challenge of the next generation. Not the next generation. This generation of business leaders is how to deal with this Keynesian endgame. Yeah.
Well, and one thing I point out is I don't think that is the challenge. I think it's the second challenge. But the real challenge for me is what I call the real economy, right? The real economy, if you go look at Robert Gordon at Northwestern University, he's the best economist in the country for 40 years, and he's nonpartisan, he's not political, on productivity growth. And so productivity's been going down for 40 years straight.
Right.
Back at Reagan, it was 4 or 5%. Now it's 1%. That is the real problem, because in the past, you could make a plausible argument. Don't worry, Dave, we're going to grow our way out of this thing. Now, anyone says that, I just start laughing, right? Because I just went over the causes of growth on our little historical excursion there. But the causes of growth are basically your capital stock, investment in capital, investment in human capital, education. How's our K-12 doing? How's our higher ed doing? And technological growth. And so earnings and profits, that are the mother's milk of the stock market, they're all predicated
There's
on
Larry
having
Kudlow right there. That's a
yes,
Kudlowism.
right,
Yep.
right.
Yep.
They're all predicated on having a real economy that works. So right now, you can't see the real economy. It's a carcass, right? If you got rid of the $9 trillion on the Fed balance sheet and got rid of $7 trillion a year in government spending, oh my word.
Yeah.
You've
got Japan.
You got Japan for two lost decades in our case.
Yes.
So you're seeing the real economy. Okay, it looks like people are making stuff and there's incomes and there's profits. But the simple way is take away the artificial sugar high, the artificial stimulus, and ask yourself, what would that economy look like without it?
Yeah.
And that's economics, right? What if? What would it look like if we hadn't done that?
Right.
And that for me is the most pressing, because that's what we're leaving the kids, right? The day of the Protestant work ethic, and all of the virtuous cycle that went with it is toast.
Also, I wonder to what degree even the quote unquote real economy, the private economy, is parasitical in the sense that, what's been growing? Social media, streaming services, online gambling, video games. Like, we're not getting a whole lot, we're not getting faster airplanes.
No.
We're not getting flying cars.
Nope.
We're not getting longer lifespans. We're getting dopamine, psychological addiction. I mean, I'm not saying we should shut DraftKings down, but DraftKings lives off in the lottery and the streaming service. It lives off our idleness and addiction to dopamine. It's essentially, it's parasitical in nature.
Yeah. No, I agree with it. It's all consumers, and that's why productivity is going down. And we got these smartphones, which were supposed to, juice our economy or something. And Gordon at Northwestern says, everybody says, I see technology all around me. And Gordon says in rebuttal, I see technology all around me everywhere as well. I just don't see it in the data. Right? There was a little .com blip for a little bit, back 20 years ago, but not since. No. Technology, artificial intelligence could be an outlier there. This thing really does look like it has productivity outcomes in the reduction of labor tasks that can be massive.
Well, I can tell you, little Bowyer research is leaping ahead of companies that are 50 times our size with 20-year head starts by using AI.
Unreal.
So I agree with you. There is something there, but there's also going to be the same thing. Like, there's also going to be a consumerist. Like, the technology company can be growth or can be distraction.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
And AI can be technology growth, and it can be distraction. And that really comes back to the Protestant work ethic, right?
Yeah.
Like, the great challenge is along came gin. Remember Gin Alley?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you have the Wesleyan revivals, and it's like technology enabled them to create alcohol really inexpensively. Right. And so then you needed temperance movements.
Right.
So it's almost like we need temperance movements from the distraction economy to really use our phones to get work done, and the AI to get work done, rather than to stop us from getting work done.
No, it's the culture. The culture is everything. And that's a perfect example. And, the cultural piece, the Wall Street Journal about a month ago had, religiosity and patriotism, which are, correlated, both falling from about 70% to the high 30s, 38, 39 in the last 5 years. Religiosity and patriotism falling off about 20 percentage points each.
Wow.
And that is not a good barometer. And that was, Wall Street Journal polling, a big safe kind of look. And that's just horrifying. And the left's gotten away with murder, right? In science, if you're going to replace a hypothesis, you have to replace it with something that explains more with less. And so we've gotten rid of Judeo-Christian ethics. Would you please explain what theory you put forward that's going to do better? And I don't see anything on the horizon.
No, they have queer theory, or various forms of all the forms of critical theory, which are only demolition theories. They're not construction theories.
Right? Marx's theory was testable, and it was proven wrong every single time in economics.
Right.
The class struggle and the causal nexus in his theory was zero. And so, yeah, but it's highly effective ideologically, right?
Right. It's good at accumulating power, just not good at
Yes.
explaining
Yeah.
human behavior. It's good at
Right.
exploiting human behavior.
Yes.
But what
Right.
did Marx say? The idea is not to understand the world, but to
But
change it.
change it, right? Yeah, it's just
Right? It's like, well, how do you
depressing.
know what direction to change it in if you don't
They don't care.
understand it? And
They
it's
don't
like, doesn't
care.
matter. With
Yeah.
if the point is, I'm changing it. I'm an agent of change. I'm in charge.
Yep.
Change we can
Yep.
believe in. All right, so let's talk about you do an annual conference, and to me,
Yeah.
this is actually a logical segue because
Yeah.
my personal belief is that the future of our civilization is spiritual renewal
Yep.
in the marketplace.
Right. Good.
Now, I'm
Yep.
I'm ordained clergy, but I don't have, but that's not mainly where I'm spending my time. Okay, I'm a marketplace person.
Yeah.
I just don't have a lot of hope necessarily for what I'm seeing mainly in the institutional church. It's
Yeah.
there, it's good, bless it, God created it. All right.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe the zone here is going to be in the marketplace.
Hope so.
So you bring together CEOs
Yeah.
from around the world.
Yeah.
Last year from Africa, for example, around the world well, you explained it. It's your conference. Tell us about your annual summit.
Yeah, well, it just started out. We started out with the summit on China, and I had all the China hawks up in D.C. for an event, and then we said, well, this thing looks interesting. A lot of business people were interested. The next year we had a CEO summit with a few hundred CEOs and leaders, et cetera. And the next year we had about 500 CEOs, and then we have an Africa outreach. So we've had former presidents from Ghana. We had the entire DRC Congo trade delegation show up last year. We had several very, very high wealth, prominent Nigerian friends come, all Christian, sub-Saharan Africa, 600 million Christians in Africa. And so, the China's going to get rich, India's going to get rich. Africa just does not have the connection nexus yet. And so part of our mission is just to make friends and help spread some U.S. capital to Africa with our friends there, looking for win-win opportunities. But the CEO Summit, we just kind of cover the breadth of issues that we think the CEOs would want to learn about. We have former Secretary of Defenses and cyber experts coming in, artificial intelligence experts coming in this year, clerks to the Supreme Court, the women executive CEO panels, just across the board, every major topic you can think of that affects modern business. And the breadth, you don't hear about it. I'm working on some populist economic stuff right now. I'm almost having fun laughing at it. It's related to this summit. But the economics profession right now, along with the mainstream media, isn't explaining what does 50 trillion in debt look like, right? It's amazing the economics profession hasn't tackled it. You haven't read anything about it. The fact that we might go to war with Taiwan. Rand did a thing. There's a 5 or 10% GDP hit to the U.S. and a 10 or 20% GDP hit to China. I haven't seen any economists working on this.
By the way, 5 to 10% GDP hit isn't a recession. It is a depression.
You just lost a tenth of your country here and a fifth there.
Right.
It's a depression, and that's with no land war on China's land. That's just Taiwan. And so, these are the issues. What does it look like if you have an invasion of your border with fentanyl coming in that's killed more people than all the wars since Vietnam? Where's the economic analysis of the inefficiencies and harms and full costs? Right, supply and demand's good. If you include the full costs of every transaction, it can still do the explanation. But the economics profession, the mainstream media are just gone. And so at this summit, people get together and just get to share their faith, their values, the like-minded, the real news of the day, what's really affecting, and your work, ESG stuff. If you're still investing, full steam ahead in China, at some point there's got to be a fiduciary responsibility, a fiduciary risk, and a risk of you getting sued for not knowing. Right? You have to know. If you're a board member or whatever. There's a responsibility that you should know at least what's in the newspapers, right? As you're making forward.
I just asked the CEO of Comcast about that yesterday.
Good. Great.
Because someone had a proposal on the ballot.
Yep.
It was, I think, National Center for Public Policy Research,
Yep.
and they they didn't want to do it. And I asked, I was respectful. I said, it
Yeah.
looks to me like CEOs have historically
Yeah.
underestimated China risk.
Yep.
Now, I'm
Right.
not a protectionist.
Yep.
I'm not an economic nationalist.
Yep.
I'm also a realist. We have pretty intertwined economies, and we can't
Yeah.
decouple in 5 minutes. I get all that,
I
but
know.
at least an
Yeah.
honest look
Yeah.
at the risk, because that
Right.
was like El Dorado. It's
Yeah.
China, it's 1.5 billion people. It's going to make us rich, and there's a graveyard of technology transfer and failed joint ventures, and
Yeah.
these CEOs are like hypnotized by it, and they're
Yeah.
not making an honest assessment of the risk of getting intertwined with China.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the most recent analysis of defense, right, is our aircraft carrier battle groups are at huge risk. And 90% of the Chinese military technology has been given to them by us. And how in the world you can do that, right? If our aircraft carriers go over there and destroy, they're just sitting ducks, I think, with the satellites and the modern, hypersonic missiles and technology at play right now.
Right.
And if we don't keep the sea lanes open, the old Bretton Woods liberal world order, Jamie Dimon,
Grotius, the Mare Liberum, right? The free seas. Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And even Jamie Dimon came out, the other day, said he was talking to China indirectly because he's over there. He said, they've got to realize, this liberal trading order is what made them rich. In order to kind of win them over, like, can we kind of keep our ships going through there? Like 50% of world trade goes through these little few straits over there. And so we'll see. It's going to be very interesting times coming up.
All right. So the CEO Summit, is there a way that people can find out more about that? Is there someplace online where they can learn more about it?
Yeah, well, I just I don't market it or whatever. I just go through trusted friends like you and people I know with solid intellectual, religious shared values.
I get your point. This is not an open forum, right?
Yeah, right,
it's referral. So if somebody knows you or they know me or whatever,
just email me or email you.
Right.
Email me at Brat@liberty.edu, and it is CEOs and C-suite folks. And it's not a sales conference, right? It's not a lobbying conference. It's not a fundraising conference. It's people in faith networking, for example, to help Africa make connections with our CEOs. And I always tell the CEOs to come, I'm not promising you're going to find a win here, but I'll guarantee out of 700 well-intentioned Christian business people, you're going to find a lot of people that will say, hey, what do you need? And I'm going to help you, right? And that's the secret sauce. Is that just shared Christian brotherhood and sisterhood of the egos get deflated immediately. You're in a distinctly Christian environment where everyone just intuitively, we're all still, everyone's still self-interested. They're not stupid, but there's some layers of trust have evaporated. And so it makes for a much more fulfilling experience.
Well, I think Christian CEOs need some place where they can be themselves and not be playing defense all the time and wondering, if I say the wrong thing, is my career over?
Yeah.
Where they can just talk about their concerns without being on guard.
Yeah. And it's not ideological. The thing isn't.
No, it isn't.
We don't target it to be some ideological thing. It's just the truth. Whatever the truth is, let's talk about it. Let's do business together.
Yeah. I think it's a terrific conference. I'm looking forward to it. All right, Dean Brat, anything else you want to leave us with before we go? Did we do enough MVPQ and your doctoral dissertation and ESG and all the rest of it, or is there something else you want to add?
I think we covered everything. We covered China, M2. I think you hit it. That's why it's fun talking with you.
Was it Jefferson writing to Adams, or Adams wrote to Jefferson, said, "My friend, we have lived in serious times."
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And we are living in serious times, and it's not entirely clear to me that our times are any less serious. That our times over the next 10 years are going to be less serious than their times.
Right. That's right. No, our founders were all in that deep Judeo-Christian tradition, highly educated, along with a devotion to enlightenment, reason, and rationality. Not just this narrow scientific rationality we have, but Socrates and the tradition of human reason and arguing and debate like the Jewish rabbis.
Right.
And boy, that's missing right now. So time to revive it.
All right. Well, that's what you're doing every day with those students, with your
Got it.
28,000 students, and
Yeah,
may
right.
God bless them and God bless you.
God bless you, Jerry. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Dean Brat. I'm Jerry Bowyer. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Meeting of Minds.